Josen watched as the rest of the boats pulled away from the sandbar. One unfortunate human soldier wasn't fast enough, and as he reached out to one of the last vessels to pull away, a fanged tentacle leapt out of the water to wrap around his waist. The man screamed as the tentacle constricted about him, his voice rending the air until it cut off in a series of wet coughs. Josen stared as blood fountained out of his mouth, and the man pushed against the cruel limb that was slowly crushing him. The dwarf priest turned away as the man resumed screaming, but this time they were short, pleading yelps that slowly died away as Josen strode to the prow of the small boat which carried them and about 30 elves toward the distant ships still waiting in the harbor. "Coward," a voice whispered in his head. He couldn't tell if it was his, Shirka's, or if it belonged to the darkness that had chased him from the woods. "Are you the dwarf from Caligdrum?" a somber voice said behind him. Josen turned to see an elf in what must have been resplendent armor, but the fighting had seen one of his shoulder plates torn from the set and a long gash split the breastplate down its middle. It was a miracle that this elf had survived such a blow. "Aye, that be me," Josen croaked. "What do you need?" "I can only imagine the horror you have experienced over the past several months. The gods know what little I just experienced was enough to keep me steeped in nightmares for years to come." The elf warily removed his helmet and let it fall to the floor. Josen was having a hard time focusing. He shook his head to try and clear it. "What?" he began before his voice gave out. He couldn't bring himself to ask the question burning on the tip of his tongue. "Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I was going to ask if you could tell me the results of your mission. It could save us some valuable time." The elf shook his own head warily. His long hair swung back and forth with the motion. We've only been here for a handful of hours. Ye say months, but that be impossible." Josen felt his knees buckle, and he slid slowly down to rest against the side of the boat. The elf stared wide-eyed at him. "You mean you don't know anything about the rift here in the glades?" he asked. Josen shook his head and pointed into the sky. The elf turned and looked up. Hovering above the darkened forest and the bloody beach they had just evacuated was a great crackling scar that stretched across the horizon like a sickly sunrise. Occasionally bolts of violet lightning would pierce the air and rolling thunder would echo its passage. They had all seen it as they had sailed into the harbor. It was nothing that could help them with the conundrum of the crystals. "This changes things slightly, then," the elf whispered to himself. Josen barely registered his words. "We should have known better than to send small squads. The glades are infested, and if time itself is not bound by rules within the forest, then who knows what all else is wrong? We'll have to mount a strong offensive." "What are you mumbling, elf?" Josen pushed himself up from the side of the boat. Gods, was he tired. "Your mission is still an essential one." The elf spoke quickly, his eyes darting across the sky as if he were making tallies in his mind. "It remains a necessary risk. We still have yet to discover the nature of these crystals you carry. I assume you still have yours?" Josen nodded and produced the purple crystal. Thunder boomed in the distance as the cut crystal was exposed to the open air. "Good," the elf nodded, motioning for him to put it away. "We have a chance, then." "What are you babbling on about?" Josen's voice was tight. His heart thudded in his chest as he waited anxiously for the elf's response. "We're going back in," the elf responded. "This time more aggressively. We have to make it to the rift and figure out what, or if, there is a connection with those crystals, and if they might help us defeat the creatures in your Caligdrum. We can already confirm that these are the same kinds of creatures you face in your minds, yes?" Josen did not respond, and the elf did not wait for him to do so. "We will find another bay and force a more aggressive assault. We need to get into that forest." Ye'll be dead if ye go in there. Joson's mouth hung open. The elf stopped and turned to face him fully. His eyes scanned the dwarf critically. You are the only one of your team to make it out, aren't you? He asked. Joson simply nodded. I can understand your reluctance, then. You have already suffered so much, and the idea of going back in there terrifies you, doesn't it? The young dwarf priest bristled at this. A sharp retort came to his lips, but it died there. The elf and the voice in his head were right. He was a coward. This elf had experienced something of the horrors that awaited within that cursed forest, and was already planning how they might push deeper into its darkness. Joson felt his cheeks begin to grow heated. It's okay to feel that way, the elf spoke softly. It fed the feeling of shame in Joson's chest. You have suffered greatly, and there is no shame in running away. Let us all accomplish the mission given to you, and then we can return. I promise that no one will judge you if you don't help us. You've given so much already. What be your name, elf? Joson asked quietly. I am Aelmond, Prince of the Ice-Kin to the north. The elf's eyes bored into his skull as Joson glared at him. The elf smirked, knowing that he had won. If ye want the best way to get in, take us to where my crew made landfall. For the looks of things, it be about 8 leagues east of here. I can show you where to go. Joson felt the bile rising in his throat. He must be mad. They were going back in, and he was going with them.